The lead House manager in the Senate impeachment trial of Donald Trump has now taken his place as one of the best political orators of the 21st century. In my personal ranking, Congressman Adam Schiff is now number 2 to President Barack Obama's number 1. At the top of the list of greatest orators of the 21st century, Adam Schiff took his place on that list in an unusual forum, the historic Senate impeachment trial of Donald Trump. Here's Adam Schiff yesterday, a day before the State of the Union address, warning Republican senators about how history will remember them.
History will not be kind to Donald Trump. I think we all know that. Not because it will be written by never-Trumpers, but because whenever we have departed from the values of our nation, we have come to regret it. And that regret is written all over the pages of our history. If you find that the House has proved its case and still vote to acquit, your name will be tied to his with a cord of steel and for all of history.
Joining us now, someone who might write some of that history, presidential historian and MSNBC contributor Jon Meacham. He's the co-author of the book Impeachment, An American History, which Republican Senator Lamar Alexander was reportedly reading in the Senate chamber on Thursday during the impeachment trial of Donald Trump. Jon, thank you very much for joining us tonight. What do you make, first of all, where do you rank Adam Schiff now in our 21st century political orators?
Oh, he's an amazing political figure, figure of remarkable advocacy. He took a largely inchoate rage about the incumbent president, which began before the 2016 election, and turned it into a coherent and, to many people, not enough, of the people with authority over it, coherent and convincing case. In fact, violated his constitutional responsibilities. And I think people will be studying the Schiff presentations in the Senate for a long time.
Let's listen to more from Adam Schiff, where he talked to the Republicans about who they are.
Yeah.
I do not ask you to convict him because truth or right or decency matters nothing to him, but because we have proven our case and it matters to you. Truth matters to you. Right matters to you. You are decent. He is not who you are.
Jon, what do you think when historians are looking at this period? Surely they will find Adam Schiff as a very helpful framer of what they're looking at.
That's right, and he's arguably he and Speaker Pelosi are arguably the most important voices of the reaction to the reaction, right? In many ways, you can think of a modern America as having been founded in 1964 and 1965. I think that's one of the reasons we're having so many difficulties, is we had not tried to govern this particular polity until the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and the Immigration Act of 1965, which undid the national quotas that had grown out of the Klan-dominated 20s. And so the America that Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and John Lewis and Lyndon Johnson helped build is the one that is moving inexorably in a particular demographic direction. The 2016 election, in many ways, was a ferocious reaction to that demographic reality. So if those are the founders, if Parks, King, Johnson, Lewis are the founders of a modern America, Trump is a reaction to it. Pelosi and Schiff will be in this narrative as the people who were trying to be the guardians of the values that had been present at the creation of the 1965 America.
Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.